can bite Why Not. You don't have it because you don't have that feeling. Why Not is out of everybody, Why Not is the most legitimate B-boy who truly listens to this music and understands this music and appreciates this music. Everybody else just listens to the shit. He listens to the shit.
Okay, yo. So today it's my pleasure to be speaking with the Senior Vice President of Rocksteady Crew, Bboy Ynot. Mr. Ynot, how are you doing today?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. How is life generally in these strange times?
Just awkward. I can only use that word. I think right now that's what comes off the top of my head is awkward. It's but I also feel necessary in a very strange way. You know, what I realized is like, you know, before we got into the new year, before we got into 2020, a lot of people were sharing that, you know, this is the year for the clear vision. And, you know, it seemed like everyone was speaking to 2020 as if there was a come up about to happen, right? Like we're going to move forward in life, whether it be financially or whatever. But I do believe that the 2020 vision was there for us to see clearly. I think that's really what that means. And I think we're getting a glimpse of what that could possibly be, at least here, definitely in America. Things are being exposed and people are starting to maybe be aware a little bit of what's going on here, you know? So I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone exactly predicted that it was gonna. I think this situation was kind of impossible. At least most of the people that I knew would not have predicted this 6 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
nobody, and we weren't prepared. Right? We weren't prepared, you know.
Exactly. And are you still able to keep busy?
Actually, when things first started happening, I got very busy. I was involved in a lot of just conversations with people online. You know, it was a part of the first break free movement that everybody did in Houston. Shout out to Moy and the Break Free, Jeremy Palmer. You know, like the community, and I say the B-boy community, B-girl community was making moves, and they still are. You can see them, you know, really trying to just stay busy, stay involved, stay connected. So I really appreciate that stuff, and I'm happy to have been called to be a part of it as well. You know, I did my own type of things by, you know, doing a couple free IG live classes, things like that. And just, you know, I consider myself of service all the time. You know, I don't think that will ever stop when it comes to being involved in hip hop, especially when you're, you know, involved with a group like Rocksteady Crew. You know, our motto is to keep the rock steady. The point of that is we are continuing to share, spread knowledge, move forward with the dance and the culture. So Yeah, that's what we do, man. I think all of this is very exciting. At the same time, people are connecting in different ways. I mean, normally we have to sit on planes for hours to just show up, and then at the same time the conversation is very short, right? We may show up, we'll do our judging thing, or we'll have our hour and 30-minute workshop, and then from then on, you're not really talking to many people. um so I'm actually feeling more connected now than I have even when I've been traveling, so it's interesting, man.
There you go. Okay. Well, yeah, good to know
Yeah.
you guys have still been able to keep busy and that Rocksteady is still providing the services that hip hop needs, I guess. And like you say, that's, I guess, part of the conditions of being within Rocksteady is you got to be kind of on call.
Hopefully, I mean, we try to, at least that's the motto that I picked up from what Legs, Fable, Wiggles, like a lot of the members of Rocksteady did, especially in the '90s. I think if you were around and watching what they were doing, they were very much proactive. Hip hop also had a very strong voice in that way. Um, and it kind of like went like this, I feel like, especially when it came into the 2000s, and now I feel like you're starting to see and hear the voices again because they're being called upon.
Mm.
So yeah, it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time, man.
Okay, man. So we're just gonna kind of dip into your story, and you can just kind of hopefully kind of guide us through your kind of journey within hip hop. And
Okay.
you can definitely fact check me on anything that any bad information I have on you, but hopefully it's more or less all good. So you grew up in New Jersey, right?
Correct.
Passaic, is that how you pronounce
I
it?
was I was born in Passaic, but I grew up. So we moved around a bit, but I went to Clifton High School. So um, that just shows you that the neighboring areas, like you have Clifton, you have Passaic, you have Patterson, Newark is close to there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, each area had its specific thing about it, but I was born in Passaic, but yeah, I would have to say where I grew up would be Clifton, New Jersey, for sure.
And your parents are New Yorkers, right?
Correct. My father was from the Bronx. My mother was from Brooklyn.
So you have New York in your DNA.
It's there, yeah, for sure. A
Yeah,
lot of
man.
family there. Yeah. Hmm.
And so you, before anything hip hop related, you were playing the saxophone and you were dancing tap. Is that correct?
I wanted to learn tap.
Okay.
I was playing jazz music, right? So I started
Mm-hmm.
off actually playing the clarinet first,
Mm-hmm.
and then I played tenor saxophone. I got into a little bit of percussion as well. But I think that was my first introduction to black culture here in America. When I started to play jazz music, I found that there was a dance attached to the music as well, I started to meet tap dancers along the way. I also was very inspired by tap, even though I didn't know how to do it. And I actually own two pairs of tap shoes. I just never had put them on.
They're just sitting
Which I
there
think,
waiting.
yeah, I think it's very interesting that they're just there. I just admire it, I think, and something that unlike breaking, like breaking was something that I just happened to gravitate to, and it spoke to me in a different way. Even though I admire tap to the fullest, um, breaking became the language for me after a while. So yeah, I just think that whole introduction was through the jazz influence, and then eventually I found hip hop through the actual music.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And was jazz being played in your house? Because I've heard you shout out your mum quite a lot for playing a lot of disco.
Yeah, she didn't play jazz. She played more Prince. I got introduced to Prince from my mom. She had disco records at home, as well as some big band stuff that I think my dad used to play. Um, and my dad also comes from a whole nother era. Him and my
Mm.
mother are over 20 years apart of
Okay.
age. So his perspective on music, I think, eventually would kind of rubbed off a bit on my mom. But then she had her own time period where she would go out dancing, and that was in the '70s. So she played certain records at home that eventually I heard at jams, and I'm like, damn, I know what this record is. You know, it was just interesting to make that, because I thought they were almost two different worlds. Like, I'm thinking the way that I live is unlike the way people were living, like in the Bronx, for example. When I first went to my first jam, it was like, wow, this is the music. Like, this is the music, I guess, of New York. I would say. I don't know. I was like putting the pieces of the puzzle together. That's how I felt when I started coming across hip hop and things like that.
Cool. And do you still play either the saxophone or the clarinet?
I don't own one, but I'm still very, very much connected to music. I realized after learning a bit of piano that, you know, that's where the composer comes to play. You know, if you can play the piano, you can play all octaves and keys. Once I figured that out, then I kind of went full blown into electronic, especially because of hip hop, right? So my first electronic instrument, I would say, would be a turntable. From there, you know, I picked up my first MPC. And then after that, you know, beat making or music production came into play. And now I'm full blown into like modular synthesis and all types of wacky stuff, man. I mean, I went head first into music for sure.
You've gone down the rabbit hole. Yeah, I get
Oh
you.
man, it's a rabbit hole. So I'm still going. I'm drowning right now in that shit, you know.
The first person I ever heard talk about, it was maybe like 5 years ago. There was an interview with Ken Swift, and he was asked, what would be your one advice to give to any b-boy? And I think the person that asked him was not expecting his answer, because his answer was to learn an instrument.
Incredible. Absolutely.
Yeah, that always stuck with me, because before I ever discovered hip hop, I played guitar.
Nice.
And I actually feel like my breaking is a lot better when I'm playing more. Like complement each other.
For sure. It's like it's almost like another training, right? You're training your ear.
Yeah.
You're starting to be more connected physically to the rhythm, you know, and you're connected to the instrument. I mean, it all plays a part in how you're being able to express yourself once you start moving as a dancer, you know.
Exactly. So, and before you ever got into breaking or anything, your kind of first introduction to hip hop or hip hop dance was popping?
Yeah, correct. Yep. You know, a lot of people, like I think Michael Jackson was a big inspiration to a lot of people in my generation. But for me, it was James Brown. I think I saw the clear influence of James on people like Michael, people like Prince as well. So when I saw James, I was like, oh, okay. So I'm gonna watch this dude, because there was something about his connection to the music that I felt like. I think Michael was an incredible mover. I think Prince as well. But James was so connected musically, because he was also, you know, really curating his own genre. He heard the music differently, which made him dance differently as well, right? So there was something about him that was electrifying to me, man. And so watching him, I was imitating things like that. But I think popping was very intriguing as well, because it was the most musical, I think, in terms of dance that I could see, because I felt like I was listening and seeing at the same time. There were glimpses of that within breaking. As I started to break, I saw pieces that Kenny would do. When I started meeting other people through hip hop dance, Buddha Stretch in particular had a couple times where I seen him dance, and I said, wow, this guy's like really musically connected, you know. So there's a musicality part that I was already intrigued to from the beginning, and I think that's why popping was like more of an interest in the beginning for me. And then when I saw the potential of what breaking and other dances could do, then I started to move into those styles.
Can I ask, because I imagine in the if we're talking about sort of the early 90s or mid 90s here, I imagine that Michael Jackson and Prince would have been on the TV a lot more than someone like James Brown, or was it still very easy? Like, I'm wondering how exactly can you remember the first time that you heard James Brown, or how you heard him, or, you know, was it at home on TV?
A record.
Okay.
First time was on record, and I'll never forget the scream. That's the thing that got me.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Yeah, it was his scream. Um, through searching for the music is when I started to find other things, you know. But these were not easily accessible. So being around the record stores, being around the people that I eventually met in the 90s, that's where I was able to see more. And that was through sharing of footage, VHS tapes, things like that, you know. Um, but yes, yeah, so hard to even think now in terms of accessibility, right? Like you had to really search those things out. And this is the reason why I mentioned James Brown first, because he wasn't as accessible. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to seek him out. I was so intrigued by him that I needed to see everything about him. At one point, I was like, I'm going to get all his records. Everything that's been pressed, I'm gonna own all of those. I need to hear everything, even when he did his disco records, like
Right.
which I didn't think were that dope, but I was like, I need these too. You know, I needed all. Yeah, you had to actively, um,
Pursue.
search
You had
for
to
the
pursue
things
it.
that
Yeah.
you had to pursue it. Same thing with breaking. It was the same way. Like even when I started doing it, like people in my neighborhood have done it also before, but that was in the 80s, and they were looking at us like we were crazy.
Yeah.
They even said, that's old. What are you doing? Oh man, we did that already. You know, as if we were supposed to create something newer, you know?
Right.
And I had to search for that. Like people kept telling me, you got to go to the Bronx if you really want to find this stuff. And eventually I'd met Legs and everybody, but I had to go there. There was no way I was able to get it where I was at unless I sought it out.
So thank you for just kind of making the connection to the next question very easy, because I've heard you speak about the Hunts Point Community Center in the Bronx, saying that
Correct.
that was the first time where you kind of saw hip hop in its entirety.
Or at least the breaking in its entirety, you know,
Okay. And you went there on your
because
own?
I first got introduced to that place by a guy by the name of Dino Mike, which was a member of my crew at the time. So I was with a crew called Rock with Finesse. These are people that I've met locally throughout New Jersey that eventually, they were older than me too. So they kind of knew, you know, what was happening. And again, you had to meet someone who was doing it in order to find out any information. It was definitely like a kung fu movie in a lot of ways, right?
Wasn't the guy a
But
taekwondo? His dad was a taekwondo teacher or something like that.
he actually was the
Yeah.
taekwondo teacher. Yeah.
So it was
yeah.
really, it was like more than just like metaphorically kind of related to kung fu. It was quite
Absolutely.
literally.
And the way it revealed itself was interesting too. If I can exactly remember, I have a very faint memory of this situation, but I just remember being in his taekwondo class. And after the lesson, he just started doing windmills. And then I just did whatever I thought I knew, but I reacted immediately, right? So just got down, started doing some shuffles, whatever, right? And then he was like, yo, like, it was crazy. Like then we connected immediately, and then he was just telling me about what was going on in New York. He's like, we got to go to these events. We got to go check it out. So he brought me first, and then eventually I traveled on my own to get there because I was just so curious. I'm still that way. I've always been like that, you know. We can't assume we know anything about anything unless we seek out information. And also, nowadays, people should know a lot of information is not 100% true. You got to go search for that. Media is very, you know, you got to sift through that stuff. You got to get to the bottom of whatever truth
it's work, right? It takes a bit of work.
It's work. It is work. Even with the accessibility being what it is now, it's still work.
Well, the accessibility thing, I think, is a bit of a myth because there's more bad information out there than there ever was.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
And
There's
it's super saturated now
than ever. So it's actually easier than ever to be uninformed, I think.
Completely misled and uninformed. 100%. I agree with you. Yep.
So was it, I mean, I get the impression that you were kind of moving between New Jersey and New York and even to some extent Philadelphia throughout your kind of teens. So, I mean, I say that to say, I guess it wasn't like a big culture shock to be going kind of on your own to the Bronx to go to this. It wasn't.
No, and you know that like even like Clifton, New Jersey is like it's not a hood or nothing like that necessarily, but you know, we're not sheltered living out there in New
Yeah,
Jersey, you know. I mean, if you've been to places like Newark, I mean, I lived in Jersey City, you know, and
Camden, New
eventually I
Jersey has
moved
a
myself.
reputation, right?
Camden has quite a reputation. Camden is probably, yeah, in terms of what we might be talking about, one of the most wild cities we have. Um, but yeah, I just, you know, yeah, it was nothing of a shock. But you know, we used to go to the city all the time too when I was younger. Like I said, I had family there, so you know, I also saw the change of downtown. I saw what 34th Street used to look like, and then what it is, I guess now, um, completely different.
When you say 34th Street, you're talking about like in New York, like Times Square and stuff.
Times Square, New York City, 34. I mean, all the way from 23rd, you know, up to 42nd. You know, it went through a really big change. It's a little bit hard to explain if you didn't see it because
Mhm.
it flipped completely upside down, man. And I caught glimpses of that all the time. You know, driving through the city with my family. So it's completely different now. It's completely different. And I think going to the Bronx was not nothing that was different either for
Okay.
me.
Yeah, it's something I had wanted to speak a bit more actually about with Q Rock, that um, you know, these processes of like gentrification and stuff in New York,
Hmm.
how the extent to which they have like complete it's these certain neighborhoods have been, I mean, for better or for worse, I guess in a lot of ways worse from a cultural perspective, have been completely, you know, their kind of cultural, the institutions and the heritage have been sort of decimated, you know, and
Yeah.
not as much, I guess, with Times Square, because the impression I get from Times Square is that it was a very seedy, it was like a lot of prostitution and stuff like that around there, right?
It was, yeah. A lot of peep show places, adult stores, things like that. Yeah.
And then, but I mean, I was in New York like 5 years ago, and we were in like the Lower East Side and East Village or Greenwich Village, it was called around there.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, yeah.
they, like, from what I can understand, that neighborhood had been completely transformed in the
Oh
past,
yeah. Now you
completely
got like
yuppified.
vegan shops, LED store, LED lights everywhere. It's different for sure. Yeah.
You were originally, Crazy Legs kind of originally approached you about about being a member of Rocksteady Crew in the late 90s. Was it before you moved to Philadelphia? He originally approached you about that?
Yes, correct. So this must be 98. Um, but he also knew that I had other aspirations, and also what I think is important to note is that you know legs at that time and the way we viewed breaking, and I say we, which is I would say the majority of people who were breaking or who
Mm,
have done breaking even in the 80s. Um, you know, you don't get older doing that. You just don't. Like it was to a certain point, and then I guess you would move on with your life, or you know, something else happens to you. Maybe an unfortunate situation, but we didn't see b-boys, b-girls getting older and continuing the dance. Legs was a unicorn at that time,
mm.
um, and then we started to see the like places like Hawaii, for example, didn't stop, right?
Right.
Because they also got it a bit later. So it's like when they saw it, they just kind of like kept it on. Same thing with places in Europe, right?
Yeah, just to
And then
make
later
a
in
point,
Asia.
sorry to cut you off, but just I
Hmm.
feel like my Belfast OGs wouldn't let me get away with this, but Belfast never stopped.
Right, there you
That's a
go.
fact. So shout out to the Belfast City Breakers, the Twins, Paddy,
Yeah.
Boo, Scotty. They all what you described about in the '90s, people dissing them, saying, "Oh, why are you still doing this?" That they went through all of it. So I know they're
Yeah.
gonna watch this. So you know, just need to say that.
Yeah, and respect to them. You know, I think that's something to really say because, if it wasn't for the love of other countries and cultures getting involved with it, it could very much possibly have just disappeared, you know, because it was not easy for the people
Mm,
who were pioneering that dance here in America.
mm,
And it still is not necessarily. Like I've gone to countries where, you know, b-boys are sponsored and have government funding for
mm,
help. Here I have to sign, you know, a lot of just grant writing I have to go through. I have to try to convince people that what I'm doing is also important, I guess, in some sort of way. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a little bit exhausting sometimes, but again, it speaks to the larger issue of what we have here in America. Like, it's not recognized. This is like why the work that I'm doing in the university, I feel, is important, because it has to be in some type of positive light, as well as see the benefit of why people are doing this to begin with. And we have to give the people who started this dance and this culture their just due. You know,
yeah.
I mean, it's just, you know, it's been an ongoing type of thing. Um, but yeah, jumping into it in the '90s was, you know, I think Legs also just saw, like, he was like, look, if you can get an education, you should, you
Mm,
know, because he also knew that we can't kind of move forward just by dancing alone.
mm,
We can't, you know. I think there's a lot of people who have, in a way, also just a privilege to be able to enjoy the dance and not enjoy the hardships that come with it, you
yeah.
know. Um, it's extremely hard to do this as your job. Some people have done it, and they're not even people like Crazy Legs, and I would expect him to reap the benefits of something like that first, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and the dancers that came before him. But it's like that's not the case. So, you know, like I said, it speaks to a larger issue. But Legs was one of those people who supported the idea of going to school. I also was just interested in other things. Like, dance was not my first love. It became a part of everything I was doing.
Mm,
It gave me a whole nother perspective on inside of myself, you know, my identity, how I felt about you know, expressing myself, and how I feel about my body in general, you know, and my mental and my physical, right? It all played a role. So I stand by that now. I continue to go on with my education. I try to encourage other b-boys and b-girls to do the same, because I do
yeah.
feel like it was a smart decision. It may not be an option for everybody, but that is also a thing. Like, there's ways that we can take the knowledge that we learn within institutions and we bring them to the community. I do that all the time. I am not just limiting myself now into the university. That's just
Mm,
another part of my journey. I am at a lot of events all the time. I am in people's communities all the time. Um, that work also needs to be done, right? So there's just so much layers to that. But I'm super thankful for Legs having that mindset at that time, and being like, hey, dude, you just do what you got to do. He used to say, we need more b-boy doctors, we
yeah.
need
He
more
says that in the
b-girl
in the
lawyers.
Freshest Kids. I think he says that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's around the time they shot that documentary, is towards that time in the
Mm,
'90s. He was speaking that truth to power, and that's what's been happening now, especially with the crew. Like, every member of our crew now has been through the education system. We're getting degrees. We're trying to also take those and bring them into the b-boy world and b-girl world, and back and forth. You know.
yeah. Well, when you think of how could it be applied to hip, I mean, sometimes I think that the idea of just trying to be a professional b-boy is somewhat more selfish than trying to sort of go down a slightly broader path where actually you can kind of pick up more skills that you can then kind of reinvest into the hip hop community actually.
Would It would be nice, you know, but you know, I can't
No, yeah,
hate
not
on
hating on
the
anyone
fact that people are
that
doing. Yeah, for sure.
pursues that life, and sometimes actually some people probably feel like that's the only option they have.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what it is, really. Coming up with options. That you know, trying to also just, you know, it's great to have dreams, but want to sell a dream to people. I want to give them options. That's what I care about mostly. I want people to have options because it's a strong possibility that whatever you put your all into may not be successful in that.
Yeah.
You know, and this is just maybe speaking financially, but then also just in general, some people have unfortunate situations. I almost stopped breaking a few times because of really bad injuries,
Me
you
too.
know,
I did
that
stop
I
for.
wasn't prepared for. Yeah, yeah. And I wasn't able to get the proper care for either, which could have ended me. You know, again, it speaks to the issues we have here. But yeah, man, I just think the options are needed. I think it's important to have things to fall back on. And again, that's knowledge and education that we tend to miss, even if it's there. We don't acknowledge that sometimes because we're focused so bad on trying to be the best. We just want to
Yeah.
do this thing because we love it. And I get that, you know what I mean? But we got to be smarter. That's all.
Absolutely. For the sort of longevity of the community, I think it's
Yeah.
a message that needs to be pushed a little bit more, I would
Yeah.
say. I have a bit to ask you about Philly then. So this is, from what I can tell, this is kind of really where you kind of came into your own, or kind of that, like you really kind of discovered yourself in term as a person within the hip hop community within Philly, right?
Absolutely.
Um, so you moved there in sort of the early 2000s, right?
Yeah, so 99, I graduated high school and actually went down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida to start my education.
Oh,
But was not comfortable there, man. That's not a place for me, I think. And then I relocated and just went to Philadelphia. So I didn't even just finish my first year of school. I already moved back up north and I applied to Philadelphia. So I started my computer science degree at the Art Institute of Philadelphia in 2000. Yeah.
and so the hip hop scene in Philadelphia at that time, from what I've heard you talk about it, it seems quite interesting. So, I mean, this is something that I had never even known about, and I feel like it could be dangerous how long we could talk about this. But this the kind of history of graffiti in Philadelphia and this debate as to whether graffiti as we know it actually started in Philadelphia. Was that something you
Right.
were aware of before you moved there?
Yeah. I was aware of Cornbread before. My connection with writing started with Kel First. He's probably one of the first at least prolific writers I've met, besides my own crew members now, but before they weren't. But Rocksteady Crew, when I met Wiggles and people like Fable, who were sprinkling things in there, you know, I was learning a bit more about writing. Also, there was a member of Rock with Finesse named Resk, who was a writer. That it's always been there. Around the same time I started dancing, it's always been there. But you know, like people would debate certain things. For example, Style Wars, right? When Style Wars comes out, they're like, well, why don't they mention? Well, Style Wars is a New York City graffiti documentary. That's why. You know, like, why would they mention Cornbread, right? But you know, Cornbread has history. It's he did what he did at the time that he did it. He has newspaper clippings of this stuff. He has receipts, I would say. I actually met him a few times, talked with him a few times. Some of my friends have been really close with him, interviewed him, talked to him. It's just interesting. Now, you know, origin stories are definitely important. And we hear this all the time. Like, people start things, but then there's usually another person that then takes that to another level, right? New York City is the kind of place that would be able to do something like that. Philadelphia, if you were there compared to New York City, maybe not. You know what I mean? Philly's a much smaller demographic, I would say. Less people are coming through there. It's not as seen as a New York City would be. You know what I mean? So whoever started it, and I'm not one person who can really, you know, talk about what that might be, or would even say like my piece on that, because like that's not my my place. But Philly has its way, and it has a very interesting way of writing that is unlike New York. And it's a part of it. It's a big part of that element, that movement, and that history. So I think if you were to get into writing, you should definitely look into Philly for information on that. Yeah.
Cool. So all the writers that are watching this, if you didn't know, now you know. So now you got some digging to do.
Yeah, go look up Cornbread and look up Philly history, you know, for sure.
So now I've heard you talk, obviously you're very well known for, amongst other things, your Top Rock, right? And from what I don't know anything about this, so I kind of want to just let you talk about this. Soul stepping or GQ, are those the same thing?
They are. Yeah, they're just two different terms of the same thing. Yeah.
And is that something that is that a Philadelphia thing, or is it a bigger? So it's something that you kind of discovered when you came to Philadelphia? Because I've heard you say that it influenced specifically your Top Rock a lot.
Absolutely did. Yeah. I came across it when I went to Philly, and I met people like DJ Cash Money, and more specifically Rennie Harris. Rennie Harris was someone who really took the time to explain what that was, and demonstrated it for me, and then put me on to looking it up, you know. So actually, if people are interested, if you were to Google or YouTube the franchise dancers, okay, so if you look up the franchise dancers, that'll give you a little bit of a glimpse of what the GQ or soul stepping is in Philly. And again, it's something that comes from also the tap era. Philly had a very deep tap connection and history. And if you look at most major cities in America, you know, they have their way of interpreting certain things and interpreting music. Like if you go to Detroit, there's certain dances that were done in the Black community that were not done in New York City. Same thing with LA. That's why you have locking, and then you have breaking, you know. If anyone knows, if you go to a locking event, you're going to hear a lot of the records you hear at a B-boy event. They're very similar, because that was the music of that time, but the interpretation of that music changed also based on the manipulation of those records, right? But yeah, you have two different perspectives with the same music. So I find that to be a very interesting contrast when you put locking next to breaking. but yeah, that's the GQ is it's dope. It derives from cha-cha, Lindy, and hustle steps as well. It did eventually kind of do its own thing. A lot of the early dancers also dabbled within breaking, so
Hmm.
they would do sometimes steps within that look similar to breaking moves and things. But that was probably the most popular dance, I would say, in Philadelphia, in the early times. So when people say, "Oh, what's Philadelphia b-boy history?" I was like, "There's not really much of that. There really isn't. There was a handful of b-boys. Um, of course, when the '80s hit, everybody did it, right? So like everybody and their mama was breaking on cardboard in the '80s, But Philly specifically had its thing, man. It was very specific to that area and those people. So
Right. And would you say that that's part of the black culture in Philadelphia generally has always had its own sort of separate thing going on, its own unique identity? Because I mean,
absolutely,
the city of brotherly love, and it has. Was it not the first city in America to have like a black mayor? I think.
I don't know that for sure, but it's possible.
Like
Yep.
always had a very the demographic sort of percentages have always been had a very very strong sort of black presence within the city, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And speaking artistically, yes, they have their own way, their own voice.
Mm,
Cash Money and other DJs had their way of DJing. Um, I think it's very clear within MCs. If you can just listen to the way
mm,
people rap in Philly versus the way they would rap in New York and things like that, extremely different. They have their own language, their own words. I mean, but again, most major cities in America do have that.
mm.
But yeah, Philly's very unique. It was a great place for me to be at the time that I was there.
Yeah, wicked. And I guess you were there when you eventually did then join Rocksteady Crew.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, and that happened at an event in Philly. And I had lost touch with Legs, I would say, for a couple of years. We've always been really close, but there were just moments where we kind of um, didn't talk as much. Um, and then when I saw him there, he was just excited, to see me at the event, and I was excited to see him because
Mm,
it was nice to see him kind of mobilizing again.
mm,
It's like I don't if people were not breaking in the '90s and they weren't in New York City, man, there was an energy that came with Rocksteady and other people of New York, um, that I don't see as much, now. It was incredible, and I carry that energy within the way that I dance. I carry the members of Rocksteady that I saw would get down in the cipher. And I tell some of my young Rocksteady members the same thing. Like, hopefully whatever I'm doing is sort of like, bleeding into some of the stuff that you're carrying on as well. Cause I do believe
mm.
there is a certain tradition that I'm trying to, you know, uphold, I guess you could
Well,
say.
you got your crew has that kind of dynasty and that lineage, which is quite
Mhm.
important. You obviously kind of go out of you. I think that's like a privilege, for the younger members to have you guys to, show them more than just moves, but convey something more to them.
Right. And I feel like that again as my responsibility for the community too.
Mm,
I would much rather pull myself out of the equation most of the time, just to be able to share what I know. I think for a while when I started, showing up on the international scene, there were some things with, other b-boys who are known. They wouldn't come to my class or nothing like that. Um, and I don't want their money necessarily, but it's like there's certain things obviously that I carry within my body that I feel like could be shared. I mean, I went through a long, extensive research and my own personal experience within breaking, to be able to then travel. um, my thought process was there's so many things and links that I've started to make within steps and music, and you know I was already on in my education bag, so to speak,
mhm.
at a young age. So I have stuff to share basically, and I'm just hoping that I can continue to do that. I realize as I'm getting older and less competitive I'm less of a threat, so it's a little bit easier for me to get these messages across now. And I do believe now
Right.
people are starting to seek some type of information from me, which is cool, you know.
We're kind of insecure as b-boy. I mean, sometimes it is a bit like
Yeah,
it's a bit funny. I mean, it just it is understandable to some extent because we're all, if you do consider yourself a competitive b-boy, there are things that go along with that. But I mean, yeah, we all have. I mean, even uh, there's things to be learned from b-boys that are not even that particularly skilled, but in terms of, I don't know, like they have managed to make it to the training session, even though they are going through they have a pretty shitty life and they got a lot of stuff going on. And, you can take something from that. There's something to be, we're kind of all in this together.
each one teach one. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
absolutely. And being in a privileged position as Rocksteady, like I said, like sometimes I need to take the action to be able to, you know, implement myself within the community, because sometimes I get pushback because like I'm the Illuminati or whatever people will go and look at, you know. But these are the mentalities that come with all these issues. Again, it's a larger perspective that happens, and I'm okay with that though, man. I never got mad at that. I get it, you know what I mean? So I move accordingly, and I just try to be of service, like I said, as much as I can.
Mhm. Comes with the territory to some extent, right?
For
The
sure. At least I look at it that way. That's how I've always thought about it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool, man. And so now you're in Arizona and you're doing your thing. You have your master's degree.
Yeah.
And are you much involved in the scene down there? Is there much of a scene? How is it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Arizona's dope, man. I came here first in 2006, I think. But yeah, one of the first crews I met was Furious Styles crew. Furious Styles also
Mhm.
has people in Europe as well. But
Yeah.
B-Boy House has always been someone who has mobilized, and done a lot for his community out here. I totally respect that crew, even though we've
Yeah.
battled too. Of course, that's a part of it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
this is routine. It's like eating breakfast in the morning. I can battle with you at the same time. I know that we're in this together, so I support them wholeheartedly. I've been to pretty much as the events as I could when I'm here. My traveling has allowed me to miss a lot of things, out here as well. But when I'm here, I try to get involved. Also, not to be too involved. Like I said again, I'm aware of like how I could be a part of the community without trying to come in and take over, nothing like that. Like,
Mm,
we got to be aware a lot of our actions, especially when you're looked at as someone, within this thing.
how you're perceived, right? I think that's an important thing is how people
Yeah,
will perceive you. And even if your intentions are right, it's important to think, how will people perceive me if I do this? How could it be
right.
perceived?
And you can't help that in a lot of ways, but I think it's good to be just aware of it. It's good to think about it, question yourself as you move into the community, and what it is you're trying to do, and you just constantly check yourself from time to time,
Mm,
and have people check you. I mean, that's the beauty of this stuff, man. We're As a community, we have to move forward together. That like all voices need to be heard. All people need to like really sit down and figure things out. Like anytime I have some type of like, someone lashing out at me, that's a red light for me. You
mm,
know, I don't aggressively approach them back. Um, Depending on what they're saying, I might have to even the playing field to a certain way, but I'd never hurt anybody. I'd
mm,
get to a point. I'd say, okay, what are we talking about here? Because also I like to uncover stuff. Like sometimes I'm like, all right, it's either you just don't like me,
yeah.
all right, and I'd rather you just tell me that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But because once we usually get down to the subject matter, they don't want to go there because they realize that they're just being real extra for no reason. And I'm like, see,
Is
I'm
this like
trying to
over
get
the
to a point.
internet you're talking about? Is this over the
Yeah,
internet?
sometimes on the internet, sometimes it is in person.
Okay.
It goes, yeah, in between those two worlds, I guess you could say. People feel more comfortable online too, which
Mm,
I like that too. Like, okay, so if that's your way of expressing yourself, I don't call them what do they call them, keyboard killers or whatever.
Keyboard warriors, or yeah.
Keyboard warriors. Hey man, if that's what makes you feel comfortable, then let it out that way. You know what I'm saying? But I'm all about that kind of stuff. I'm like, let's go. I'm here for the smoke all the time. But that's what battling has taught me. You know what I'm saying? Like hip hop has taught me that. You know, Frosty Freeze gave a very interesting perspective on what this is about. When he said competition is tradition, that is a big statement, because it's basically saying we do this. You don't get any extra brownie points for battling. You don't. Why should you?
No, I agree. That's like when fighters say, well, or I've heard people say, well, yeah, he stepped into the ring. It's like, yeah, but he got like completely fucked up in like 30 seconds. It's kind of like, I mean, he's supposed to step in the ring. That's like
you're
step
a fighter.
zero.
That's what you do. Right, exactly. Like knowing that you're a part of a community and you don't battle, hey, you know what I'm saying? But if you do battle also, hey, what do you want, a cookie for that? Like we all battle. That's how we get here. That, you know, most of the names that you know who are names in this have done that extensively, you know, whether it be something that you saw or didn't see, whether it's on YouTube or not, you know. They've been here, they've been in the community, they've paid their dues in that sort of way, you know. And if you didn't, you'll get called out on that. And that's, again, that's the tradition. That there's no harm being done there. There's no, like, you know, no reason to even get appalled. It's like, okay, I'd much rather handle it that way anyway.
Yeah.
So
and
it's all good.
Kind of, you know, that these kind of standards do have to be enforced to some extent. You know, where it's like, okay, is this person involved, but they have a certain status, but they have never battled? I think it's absolutely reasonable that people are allowed to question that, at least question it.
For sure. But also, you know, trying to call them out when they're 50 ain't going to give you the answer you need.
Yeah, I never even,
like I have no, like if I'm a fighter and I'm just going to fight someone who's clearly not in any physical shape to be doing anything like that, I mean, you're just, that's just like bullying after a while. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So that's why I mean, we see this maybe a bit. I don't know. I'm the online talk and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't know how healthy it is. I mean, it's sort of unavoidable in this modern age, but I don't know. I don't know. Well, speaking of that, do you think this Tyson Holyfield fight is going to happen?
It might. If it does, I just hope they don't get messed up. You know what I mean? Those are two strong fighters, you know. Doing it for charity, though, I think is a beautiful thing.
That's the only way it makes sense, right?
Absolutely, yeah. If they're just gonna fight, I'd rather not watch it, to tell you the truth. Even if something spectacular were to happen, you know, I think Mike Tyson's life is extremely interesting. I think he's such a character, man, you know, but he is an interesting person, man. And you know, I want him to be okay as well. And I think he's excited about it. I think he has a new, you know, understanding of his own life, and he loves to fight, you know, and that's what's up. That's what he does. He does it very well.
But I don't know if he does love to fight. From a lot of what I've read and heard, I don't know if he loves.
Yeah,
to
sounds like he was backed into it in a way.
He was fighting a lot out of fear and out of like primitive kind of desperation. I think that's part of how he was so kind of ruthless.
Yeah. But if he's in a fight again, then I would question the fear, you know.
Oh yeah, no, now, and that's why I was kind of surprised when it started being talked about, because, you know, I've heard him say that he doesn't even like or he said, he has a quote where he talked about his son wanting to get into boxing.
Mm-hmm.
He said to his son, who I suppose grew up like obviously much in a more comfortable financial situation, more privileged, and he said to his son something like, "Are you for real, man? Are you kidding? You're gonna have to go in there and fight some like savage like me when I was 20." He's like, "There's nothing dignified about that." He's like, "I was an animal."
Yeah.
Like, no, but now I think it would be a different story. I think now he seems like a much happier person.
Right. Or maybe he just sees also too, it's an opportunity again for him to do something good, and if he has to do it through fighting, he will, even if he
Yeah.
doesn't want to do it. I don't know. He's, like I said, he's interesting, man, and I think you know, it's great that we can still hear from him as well. We can hear his perspective. We can hear the way he thinks about this whole thing, his whole life that he's lived. Um, yeah,
He recently shouted
crazy.
out. I don't know if you saw. He has a podcast called
Hot
Hot
boxing.
Boxing. And did you see
Yeah.
Havoc from Mobb Deep was on it? And
Yep. Talked about
I don't think he got the
legs.
words out, Rocksteady Crew, but he said crazy legs and those guys from the Bronx.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, he was around. He saw a lot of hip hop too when it was coming up and doing its
Yeah.
thing. You know, I mean, anybody who was anybody in the New York area, you could be from Brooklyn, the Bronx, you know, Harlem. Uh, you know, in a strange way, you were a part of it too. It was like I said, a community thing. It's like, so he's seen it. He feels that energy too. I think he was trying to talk about breaking in a way, right? Like he was like, yeah, they need to fight, you know, like.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, yeah, salute to Mike Tyson, and a super, super dude. Great that he's still around and kind of dropping knowledge in 2020.
Yeah.
So, yo, man, on your website, it says something like that it says on whynotism.com, which we will definitely drop a link to on
Okay.
this. All of the kind of recent work you've been doing with your art and sculpture and architecture and different dimensional works. And it says, I just want to find the quote. Yeah. As a b-boy, he works internationally at judging battles and teaching workshops. So when I read that, I thought, does that you are not retired from battling?
No.
You're not. You still intend to continue battling.
I think as long as I'm active, I'm available to battle. You know, I think it gets tricky when, you know, you become a certain age, and the format, I think, is not ideal for someone like me at this point.
Okay.
Because it's like, you know, and I've done a couple battles even just within the past couple of years where I'm like, I have never been to an event where I'm there and I'm waiting for,
Talk about
I don't
it.
know, 7, 8 hours, and then having to perform one round.
Yeah.
You know, this is why, like, I think it's also important for judges to do this as well. And this is why I say I'm not really out. I'm not retired, because I am still participating. When I see someone battle on these stages, I have an idea of where they're coming from, because I'm also a part of those stage events, right? I think if I stopped battling, I would pull myself out of the judge's seat after a while, because it's constantly changing and evolving. And at some point, I'm not going to understand even what they're doing, I think, you know?
Right.
But yeah, that's a thing, man, to wait that long. And I'm already not 100% in that mindset and mentality to even understand how that works, until, like, I did it a few times, and now I'm like, okay, I need to know how to rest, when to rest, what, you know. It's a completely different format and way of how you have to carry yourself through this stuff. And then even when you battle, it's not the same. Like, the way I break is not really conducive to, I need to throw everything I can in that one round. I don't even dance like that. I have not danced like that for 20 years, you know. Can I learn it? Possibly, but then that means I need to train like that.
Yeah.
Do I train like that? Absolutely not. You know, I'm not dancing as much. Even when I was younger, I did a lot, but like I said, it's been a part of my life. And when you're, you know, in the larger scope, I guess, in hip hop, you do it. It's like, you just do it. You get up, you
It's muscle
dance.
memory. It's in you.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, when it becomes this like competitive, like really competitive, like hip hop has always been competitive, but not to the point where it's like you got sponsors, judges, you know, energy drinks, etc. It's a completely different ball game, you know. So I'm not trying to like hang in there. I'm really okay with also just getting out of the way, you know. So, which again, like I'm happy to say that I am involved in a lot of things. I don't have to be there if I don't want to, you know what I mean? Um, and I will know, I think, at some point if I'm serving or hurting my community. You know, I'm pretty sure I'll figure that out. And hey, by all means, get me the fuck out of there if that's what it is. You know what I mean? Sorry to curse, but I'm just saying, you know.
Do you get called out a lot when you go to events in ciphers and things like that?
Not really. Not
Really?
as much as even I want to sometimes, you know. I guess there's just a respect level there, and I appreciate that. You know what I mean?
That's
But
cool. So yeah, I've heard from other. Now I have to say not directly, but indirectly about other other sort of established b-boys that they can get a bit frustrated going to events and where there's a lot of younger kids and constantly getting called out.
oh yeah, they get a lot of heat, you know. I think people look at me in a way as an OG, strangely. You know, I'm 39 years old, which kind of also means I would consider myself an in-between. I'm not young,
Yeah.
I'm not old, right?
Yeah.
I also consider myself a bridge in a lot of ways. But you know, I do get that sometimes, and I react to it. I mean, it is what it is. But you also have to know that when you're out here like that, you're opening the door for that type of energy, you know. So yeah, expect that. You know what I mean?
Again, kind of comes with the territory a little bit.
It comes with the territory, 100%.
Bboy Ynot, you ready? DJ, let's go! Engine number 9. Can you get me back on time? Move on down the track. Keep that speed coming off the stack. Keep on moving. Keep on moving. Keep on moving. Keep on moving down the line. Seems like I've been gone for days. I can't wait to see my baby's face. Yeah, been so long since I held her. Been so long since I held her.
How exactly do you become? I mean, a lot of crews obviously don't have the structure of Rocksteady, or president, vice president. Can you kind of outline exactly the structure of Rocksteady and how that works in terms of the hierarchy?
Well, it's gone through a lot of changes, and I think it's also because Legs is trying to figure out how to move forward as times change. You know, the latest idea is that he has myself as senior vice president, Phoenix, B-Girl Phoenix as junior vice president, excuse me. And I think, you know, the idea, he's starting to realize that there's this idea of like a younger generation and an older generation, you know, and the fact that we're still all very active, that we need a balance of those mentalities. So, and our crew is very also unique, I would say, in that way. There's not many crews that not only do I see a generation gap, but do I even see gender? You know, I don't see many crews that have just as many B-girls as they do B-boys. So we have a lot of internal conversations that happen probably way more than most crews.
Okay.
We're also not very close to each other geographically.
Right.
And as we get older and everyone's going to school and all these things are happening, we are getting further and further apart from each other. So we have a lot to manage, but we try to stay in communication as much as possible. And I think that's the main thing. And just mobilize in our own areas of where we're at. And usually things like the Rocksteady anniversary or Puerto Rocksteady, which is the annual event we have now in Puerto Rico, those are our moments to come together. You know, we celebrate our own legacy, whatever, you know, the history that we have as a crew, but then we're also there talking, sharing, figuring out what we're going to do next, because we are still here. We're trying to decide what's going to happen. You know, and now that we're going into this education realm, it's a new uncharted territory for us. But we have now B-boys and B-girls within the crew who are bringing other things now to the table. They're not just bringing their ability to battle or perform or anything else that, you know, crews do, you know. So, you know, I can't tell you that there's a very clear structure here either. We're learning as we're going. And the interesting thing about being in this whole thing, especially now, is the same way I felt when I was in the 90s, where I was like, I don't know what to do because I can't see myself breaking that 25. You know, now I'm thinking, okay, what does it look like for even just Ynot himself when he gets into his 40s? What's that supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? How can I be of service and not be in the way? So I'm already questioning those things, right? Now, what does Rocksteady do as a whole? You know, what are we providing for our community? Because people do look to us for information, things like this. And then what happens now? This is what I'm starting to think, and I don't want anybody to get weirded out about it. When we don't have Crazy Legs anymore, when we don't have Mr. Wiggles, what do we do, right? So these are things that I'm starting to think about, and then also bring forward, and we're having these discussions now. But that gap, that generation gap, I feel has been very serving to us as a crew. We get different perspectives, and again, the gender as well, the women and the men together, talking about also just their own issues, you know, and what they deal with and what they need to face all the time, and then how we just support each other and move forward, because we are then in this crew together. So
yeah,
it's interesting, man. But like I said, I don't see many crews that have to deal with that necessarily. A lot of them don't have that type of a variety, you know.
Well, and there's not many crews that are kind of like an institution within hip hop the way that Rocksteady is. So again, kind of comes with the territory. You want that institution you know, we don't want to lose it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people expect a lot from us too.
You know, eventually, yes, those elders will. No one's going to live forever, including them. And so, yeah, for the sake of that crew and the longevity, and for the sake of hip hop, you know, those kind of conversations need to happen.
Yeah, and I think I think people expect a lot from us, but I also think that that's part of the respecting that I was talking about, which is why maybe people ease up on their grip on me a little bit, because they know they're like, they see what I'm doing, I think, in a lot of ways. So I think some B-boys and B-girls are just like, hey, that's Tony. Let him rock, man. Let him do his thing. You know, we appreciate whatever he's doing, whatever his crew is doing at the moment. And that's cool. You know, I do miss out a lot on like that energy of feeling like going to an event, nobody knows who I am, you know, getting into the trenches of the ciphers. I love that, man. That has kept me going. But at the same time, I know, again, I'm aware of my position. I got to move differently now. And I feel very fulfilled by thinking of myself now as a person who would rather serve, you know.
Yeah.
Serve not on the floor, but serve the community. You know what I mean?
You move from one. Once
you can get that too, though.
On the floor, you got to serve in a different way.
Yeah, you can get that too, though. I got work still. I got work. You know, I'm not sitting here. I'm not lazy. I still get busy. You know, I keep myself physically ready for anything. Because that's also part of my mentality. You know, I'll never let myself.
Keep it real, man. You kind of still look like. If I saw a picture of you from like 15 years ago and a picture of you now, I would have said they were a picture from the same week. You know what I mean? You don't look a day older, man, to keep it real. And like,
Thank
that's,
you. I'm aging
you must be
pretty
kind of
well.
looking after yourself.
I am. I feel different. I'll put it that way. I may not look different, but I feel different. But yeah, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, I'm trying to just, like I said, dance as long as I can, man. Longevity, I think, has become the conversation, has become the mentality now. And I think all b-boys and b-girls will eventually come across that road, and the decisions you make is going to allow you to move forward or not. And you know, I suggest people who start thinking about that, especially as they get closer towards their late 20s into their 30s.
There you go. You heard it. And
Yo.
I completely agree. I'm 30 in about 10 days.
Nice.
So you know how it goes, man. You start thinking about stuff and all that. But
Yeah. It's life, man.
Yeah, exactly, dude. It's a privilege to be getting older. A lot of people don't make it to 30 or 40 or
100%.
real. So I'm not complaining, you know.
Nice.
Just to finish off, man, I've just got a couple of kind of quotes that I want to throw at you, just for you to kind of elaborate on them a little bit.
Okay.
I kind of picked up from different, mostly videos. You actually have more videos on YouTube than I realized.
I have a lot.
Yeah, you do. A lot of people want to talk to you, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
So this one I like. Just because I can do a chair freeze doesn't mean I have foundation. So can you just kind of elaborate on your definition of foundation? Because I think a lot of us have it twisted.
Wow.
Foundation is not just moves, you know what I'm saying? It's not just moves. Foundation has moves. It's like, yeah, you got swipes, you got fucking backspins, you got sweeps, you got chair freezes, you got top rock, you got footwork. Like, yeah, that's foundation, you know what I'm saying? But foundation really ultimately is having that and understanding what the dance is. That's another part of foundation that you need to know, you know what I'm saying? If you don't understand the movement or if you don't give what the music is giving you, you know what I'm saying? Then you're not doing foundation. Okay, just because I can do a chair freeze doesn't mean I know about foundation. It's the way I do my motherfucking chair freeze. It's when I do it. You know what I'm saying? That's what makes it foundation.
So that is, yeah, man, that clip always is interesting for me to see, because I was in my early 20s, I think, when I did that interview.
I think it's from the Scheme. I think it's from the Scheme documentary.
Right. Yeah. We, you know, when I met Scheme, we were a bit of a duo for a while, because like we shared each other's knowledge on music and dance. And he gave a really great perspective about Philly for me. And you know, I had my own moving around from Jersey to New York to Philly, and my background in music also was unique, so we always met on that level in terms of music. But yeah, we were you know, basically a team. Everywhere we would go, every event, we'd be there, and we would feed off of each other, basically. Like he said, even in that documentary, he'd play a record and look to see if me or even my boy Down Rock, who was also somebody I rolled with all the time, you know, you see how we would react to it. But yeah, I was really passionate in that moment, I think, too, in how I was speaking, because I had just now, at that point, started to see a little bit more of the world. So I started to travel, and, you know, it was a bit of a culture shock for me to see hip hop being done differently than what I'm used to seeing. And also kind of noticing that there was this line that was being drawn, when, if I can put myself back into like when I started breaking, and how I feel like the 90s generation, you know, b-boys and b-girls really approached the dance. They were very unique in their own way. We used to know even where someone was coming from based on how they danced. You know, you can almost tell what city they were from. You definitely knew what country they were from by how they got down. And I started to realize that there was almost like this kind of mediocre cookie cutter way of doing it. And I felt passionate about that. I got a little bit upset about it. And I think what I was trying to get at in that interview was foundation doesn't just mean that we're doing this idea of what we know the dance to be, which is like, even if I have to simplify even more, top rock, footwork, freeze, power move, right?
It doesn't just mean the basics, basically. It doesn't just mean the most basic
Right.
movements.
Right. Because a lot of people would say, oh, know your foundation. And I'm like, I think a lot of people do know their foundation in terms of the movement, but are they aware of everything else, the music, the individuality, the fashion, the community, the culture as a whole, not just breaking. I feel like there's so many hip hop heads that are like, but all they do is break. And I'm like, yeah, that's one small perspective to a larger idea, I think. So I was just expressing myself and how I felt about that. And I was trying to maybe just say, let's look deeper than that. Let's try to not just also simplify it and put this in a package that we feel we can just share it in one sentence and people know what it is that we're talking about,
No, it sounds a bit like you kind of regret that quote, but I actually think it's great. I think it's...
No, I don't. It's just like I just put myself back there, and I think about. I still feel the same way. I would never change my my perspective on that. I think the thing about it is, it's like, sometimes I wish I communicate better. I think that's what it is.
To me, the way it came
I cursed
across
a little
like,
bit, I'm a little bit too like, and this is nowhere near the bravado I remember myself being as a young, why not? I was pretty hip hop policey sometimes, until I started to learn more about myself as well. But it's a good clip, I think. Yeah, it's a good clip. I don't regret saying any of that stuff. I really don't.
No, I just think it shows a slightly deeper understanding of what foundation is, because anything that's worth learning isn't that easy to learn, and foundation isn't as easy as just learning a chair freeze and learning a 6-step.
Yeah, and even though you can execute it, doesn't mean you know it.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Right.
And the other one I want to ask you, and I can't exactly remember where it's from, is process is everything. And I think you were speaking generally about kind of trying to emphasize patience in terms of how we approach this and things like that. Can you elaborate a bit? Because I feel like that's a little bit lost, not just in breaking or hip hop in this current age, probably just in life in general. We live in a very microwavable, fast food, Instagram story kind of world.
Yeah, I would definitely say patience is a part of what that means as well. Yeah, you should take your time. You should take your time with it. There's no rush. There is no point to get to. You may have an idea of what it is you want to do, but enjoy the whole process of getting there. And then not only that, the process is what makes things. The process is what pushes things forward. The process is how we learn about ourselves. There's so much within that aspect of it that you should want to stay in there almost all the time. Sometimes I self-sabotage. Before I get to a product, I'll self-sabotage. I'll burn it down and start all over again. Because I don't want to, I'm not here to make this thing, Let's just talk about like my chair design, for example, right? I've had that idea for over 15 years. There's other writers that I know who were thinking that way already back in the day. I've eventually, with the help of my friend Van, physically made it, right? But the thing is, then I realized how interesting things work, because then people were like messaging me and going, how much?
Right. They wanted to buy it.
Where do I get one? My name starts with an A. Could I get an A chair? It's like, and the whole time I'm like face palm emojis, but I can't blame them, because I think they think about product all the time.
Yeah.
To me, it's not for sale. I'm just showing you what's possible. And I wrote that numerous times every time I shared that image, because I was trying to say that I want you guys to see where it is I'm going. I don't want to sell this to you. I don't want your money.
Mm-hmm.
It's bigger than that. There's a deeper understanding of what I'm trying to do here, and I'm working within the knowledge and understanding of a hip hop practice. And I'm telling you that we can build with these things. I'm telling you that this carries a knowledge that we can bring these things into larger ideas outside of what we think about them. Like maybe we think about it more as entertainment. It's bigger than that. You know, maybe we think about it as, well, it's helped me physically. Yeah, okay, yeah, it's bigger than that even. You know, there's more to it. And that can even go back to the foundation thing I was talking about. It's the same thing, right? It's more than what you see. It's a lot deeper than this finished chair freeze. You know, the process of getting to that chair is what I'm so excited about. This is why I never put out music for such a long time. I've been playing with music for years. I never put a song out because after I made the song, I was sad.
Because
you
it was
know
all.
why? Because the process was done. It's done
Yeah.
now. And now I'm going to put this out to you, and you're going to be only seeing the product of it. And but what you don't understand is the process of getting to that sound was so amazing for me.
And with
You know?
music, even more almost than with. Well, actually, in my personal experience, more maybe than anything else. Like I have been in a professional studio once in my life, and if someone had warned me how tedious and repetitive it was going to be, I don't think I would have stepped foot in there.
It's work. It's a lot of work.
It's serious work, and you kind of you move between absolutely hating what you're creating and then moving to loving it and back. And it's I mean it's the same if you're trying to learn something difficult in b-boying, I suppose.
For sure. Yeah. It's an emotional roller coaster, you know.
Yeah, and it tests your kind of mental patience, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I love this stuff. That's why creative processes cannot be overlooked, man. And that's what I'm bringing to the university as well, to show that there's so much value in this. And they always want to see, well, what's it going to produce? I'm like, don't worry about that. Stop worrying about that. It ain't about that. It's about the process. It's always been about the process, you know, and that process never ends. That's how you know it's not about the process. Because even when you make a product, at the end of the day, you know, that exists just in a it's frozen in time.
Yeah.
You know, and your process continues to move forward. Your product doesn't. It stops.
Yeah.
It has a stop point. You know, so.
You touched on one or two of the other quotes I was going to say, but then you mentioned, you know, your work in the university. From what I can tell, I don't know if you still are kind of considering doing some kind of PhD, going down that path. How have
Absolutely.
you found your experiences in the academic world generally? Have you found that you've been, I imagine that you are probably perceived as somewhat of an outsider.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
In many ways, not only just because of the particular genre I'm working within, but you know, I'm still out here doing it. You know, to be a practitioner and a scholar at the same time is also a political thing on its own. You know, but yeah, I have years of experience. My pedagogy is based on that, as well as my mentorship that I've gained, but then I have also given. And there's all these things that I want to explore that I think we've never really been able to move forward with. Like I said, even just in the realm of writing, like there are writers that had ideas of building things, just didn't have the means to do it. Right. So how do I also then have access to these resources, which also makes it difficult for me to move within the university, because I'm also asking for a lot. I'm asking for their support as well. Right. So this will constantly also be a thing that I'm trying to generate these resources for not only the university and my students, but for the community, because it has to work hand in hand.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I also think that in our societal structure, but then also within our institutions, we tend to separate because of that as well. Just because you have an education doesn't put you in a different bracket than somebody else. It
Mm.
does because you did the work to get there. It does because you served those 4 years or whatever to get that degree. You deserve that for sure. But you also were able to pay for it. And if someone wanted to, maybe they can't. So it's important for us to as an institution, I believe, how do we get the people who really want to be here and here at the same, you
Mm.
know? It's a whole nother thing. So there's just many layers, I think. And I'm hoping to be a person who can, in some sort of way, serve each one of these things that I'm talking about. So that's the things that are in the larger idea of me being there, you know. But I'm working at it. I'm always up against something, but that's always been, you know, something I've dealt with. I'm here for the smoke, like I said. However long it takes to do things, it's no worry to me, you know, because I'm still doing a lot of what I want to do, regardless. And that's moving within the b-boy world or not. That's moving within the university world or not. That's
Hmm.
like I'm so multifaceted. If one thing is put on hold for a bit, I'm still moving regardless.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so you would say then that, would it be fair to say that you see your future as kind of serving hip hop from within the academic world, or kind of pursuing or furthering the agenda of hip hop within the academic world?
Possibly. But I think that's also just one part of it, you know. Even
Okay.
that, like my whole academic involvement, I look at that as a piece to the
Okay.
whole, you know. I put a lot of energy into a lot of things.
How many
And
hours do you have in your day, man? Like 30, 40? That good? Or,
you know, sometimes, okay, here's the thing. This is what I've learned after a while, because I get that question a lot, because people see me doing a lot of things. And I think the question comes up too is like, well, how can you give 100% to everything? You can't. And I totally agree with that. I
mm,
don't, you know, but I give it 100% when it's time to.
mm,
I think it's important to know, like, if anyone watched the Michael Jordan documentary, I think one of the biggest takeaways from that was to be present. And what Michael was saying was, when you're in the game, you're in the game. That's it. There is nothing else. It's only the game.
right.
And I totally related to that, because when I get into something, I'm doing that thing 100% to the best of my ability. Everything else, I mean, technically going to wait anyway, because now I'm doing this. Right?
Mm,
And I do so much research on everything that I'm a part of. I spend a lot of time doing what I believe are important, which is planning properly. You know, like they say, the five P's of power. P's of power is proper planning prevents poor performance.
mm-hmm.
If you show up prepared, and if you're always ready, I learned this from breaking. You're always ready. There's no moment where you're like, I'm not really training right now. No, you train all the time,
Yeah.
right? Um, I've learned that from being a b-boy, and I take that into every aspect of my life. So I'm prepared, and when I walk in there, I'm going for the gold, and that's it, you know. So easier said than done, of course. Do I fail? Absolutely. Do I not meet the mark most of the time? Yeah. But I also don't quit. And it's, again, like I said, I'm so invested in so many things. I'm not gonna sit into the emotional distress of failing that long. I'm gonna be there for a second. I'm gonna hold my head down and be like, damn. But you know what? Minutes later, I'll be like,
Yeah.
you see me tomorrow, though.
Back on the
You know,
horse. Yeah, man.
back on it. I mean, you know, because when you stop, it stops. And I think as long as you know that, you won't. You'll just keep going. You know, so.
Well, ill, man. Yo, and I think apart from the guys that seem to be either talking shit to you online or in person, I think I speak for everyone else by saying thank you for the stuff that you are doing, and for pushing the boundaries, and for you know, I think it's doing a bit of a disservice to say that you just think outside of the box, because you're actually, I mean, you're working outside of the box and you're doing a lot of stuff that a lot of people, most other people would be afraid to do, I think, and you're taking a lot of risks and you're doing it for more than just you, I would say. You know, we're all a little bit invested in what you're doing.
That's awesome.
It
Yeah, and
furthers
I hope
what we're all a
people
part of
do.
a little bit more.
Yeah, and I hope people benefit, man. That's all. That's all I really think about too. Of course, everything that you do individually is going to benefit you as well. But I think with the intention that you also want to serve and benefit everyone else, you move a little bit differently, you know. And I'm hoping people catch on to that. If they don't, that's fine. I know what my mission is, and you just got to continue. Like I said, you stay and like you stay on that horse, man. You're going to ride that off into the sunset. So.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, man. So, yo, you got any
Word up.
last thing you want to say to anyone that's going to be watching this? Any shout outs or anything you got going on that you want to just put out there?
Hmm.
Any haters you want to address if it's just right in the front, in your frontal lobe right there?
Oh no, I don't ever address them. I meet them head on. I always just want to talk
Yeah.
with them. I don't want to hate on them. You know,
Yeah.
it's just giving them the same energy. No, I mean I have nothing to say, man. Hopefully my actions will say enough. You know.
That is
So.
very refreshing to hear. That's a good thing, a good message to send out. So, yo, thank you so much. Why not from me, all the guys in Belfast, and anyone that's going to be watching this is going to say thank you very much for taking your time to do this. I'm going to hit stop recording. And, yo, peace out, my man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.